Today, we're diving into a collection of sources that all point to one thing, a remarkably consistent playbook that seems to have defined Donald Trump's entire career. We're talking from his early days in real estate all the way to the White House. So, let's break it down.
This quote from the man himself really says it all, doesn't it? It perfectly frames what we're exploring today. The sources we're digging into suggest this lifelong focus on public perception, on always commanding the spotlight, and maybe most importantly, on the absolute need to win. It's really the central idea that ties everything else together.
So, here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at biographical accounts of his early years to see where this playbook even came from. Then, we'll jump into some academic analysis of his presidency to see how those same rules played out on the world stage. And finally, and this is a key part, we'll explore some speculative and, fictional sources that imagine how this playbook might look in the future.
All right, so where did all this begin? To really get the playbook, our biographical sources tell us we have to go way back to his earliest days in Queens, New York, where these core ideas were first shaped by family and, well, a whole lot of ambition. According to one major biography, his father, Fred Trump, was the single biggest influence in his life. And the lesson he taught him wasn't just about being successful, it was about total domination. The goal was to be a king, and to get there, you had to be a killer. This wasn't just friendly advice, it was a core expectation. And this mindset was really cemented during a few key moments. At just 13, the super competitive, super rigid world of military academy was where his aggressive side really flourished. Then, in 1964, he saw the guy who designed a bridge get completely ignored at the opening ceremony. The lesson he took away? Never, ever let yourself be made a sucker. And then, in 1973, when the Justice Department sued his family's company for racial discrimination, his response, to just come out swinging, pretty much set the pattern for the next 50 years. So, you can see how these experiences started to harden into a really clear set of rules. Win no matter what, control the story, and if someone hits you, you hit back twice as hard. According to the sources, this wasn't just a business plan. It basically became the personal philosophy he took everywhere he went.
Okay, next up, we're going to look at what some academic sources have to say about how this very personal playbook got applied to the national stage when he became president.
And that really is the big question, right? How do the tactics you learn as a New York real estate guy actually scale up to the highest office in the land? What does that even look like when academics put it under a microscope?
Now, this is pretty interesting. One academic analysis actually draws a line back in history to frame the whole era. It makes a distinction between the term grantism, which was all about the scandals and corruption inside President Grant's administration, and Trumpism, which it defines as something much bigger, a whole political movement built on America First policies and, of course, that same combative style.
And that same academic source kind of leaves us hanging with this thought. It asks this fundamental question about what statesmanship even means, what qualities we expect in a president. And that's a really powerful idea to hold on to, especially as we move into our next set of sources. Okay, and here we are making a really important shift. I've got to be super clear about this. Everything we're about to talk about in this next section comes entirely from speculative and fictional sources. These are works that are just imagining how this playbook could operate in a hypothetical future.
In these fictional stories, the game totally changes. It's not just about business deals or winning a news cycle anymore. These projections show the playbook being applied directly to the institutions of government. And, as you can imagine, the stakes are seen as being way, way higher. For example, one fictional Wikipedia article lays out a potential second-term cabinet. In this imagined world, news media observers are described as seeing these choices as a pure reflection of the playbook, valuing personal loyalty over everything else as a way to control the government machine. To give you an idea of what that looks like, one fictional source imagines this huge institutional shakeup. In its made-up account, a new government department gets created, and its mandate leads to the dismantling of USAID, canceling 83% of its programs. This fictional projection keeps going right into immigration policy, tying back to that playbook rule of fighting hard. The same source claims that in this imagined future, after rules preventing arrests in places like schools and churches were ended, 37,660 people were deported in the first month alone.
And to make sure control is absolute, that same fictional account describes a plan to completely politicize the civil service. This imagined scenario includes mass firings of federal workers to replace them with people who are seen as being more ideologically loyal to the administration's goals.
And this quote, which comes directly from that speculative source, really sums up the whole projection. It describes a scenario where the playbook's main rules are applied to the power of the presidency itself. It's a really stark contrast to that academic question we saw earlier about statesmanship, right? So, after looking at all of this, the biographical, the academic, and the fictional sources, how do we put it all together? Our final section looks at a framework that's presented in one of the fictional accounts that actually tries to put a name to it.
A professor who is cited within that fictional Wikipedia source is described as organizing all of these projected actions into 5 main buckets. The framework, which this fictional professor reportedly calls proto-authoritarian, covers everything from undermining institutions and controlling information to a more aggressive foreign policy. It's the label used inside that fictional story to define the playbook when it's applied to the entire government.
So, from his father's lessons in Queens to the heights of global politics, and even into these imagined futures, the sources we've looked at all seem to point to one single consistent playbook. The tactics don't really change, just the playing field and the stakes get bigger. And in the end, the sources leave us with this one big, provocative question. After seeing the playbook used in business and then in politics, what happens when the game itself becomes democracy?